The ANC, in my opinion, made a mistake in how they dealt with Jacob Zuma. I think that what should have happened from the very beginning was to give Jacob Zuma a dignified retirement. I understand that there are people who wanted more. They wanted Jacob Zuma to be held accountable for state capture. They wanted to show that Cyril Ramaphosa is strong. They wanted to show supporters and donors of Cyril Ramaphosa that they were going to get Zuma and that Zuma was going to rot in jail. I think all of these things were a mistake. And I'm going to explain why. Looking at the most current events happening with the ANC, Jacob Zuma has turned out to be the biggest nightmare for the African National Congress in this election. He's simply their biggest nightmare. Why? Because the ANC was already polling badly before December of 2023. They were already below 50%. Then Jacob Zuma announced that the Umkhonto weSizwe party would be contesting and that he would be supporting them. And then eventually he fully became the first candidate and party leader. He said he was going to be a member of the ANC. He said he was teaching the ANC a lesson. And he said particularly that the ANC had now become a Ramaphosa ANC. When you are vulnerable, when you are vulnerable as a liberation movement, at this particular moment in history, the ANC is looking as if they will not be able to get 50% in Gauteng. It's looking as if they will not be able to get 50% in KwaZulu-Natal. It's looking as if they won't be able to get 50% in Mpumalanga. These are large provinces. So if you're not able to get 50% in those, and of course, they already don't get 50% in Western Cape. If you can't get 50% in all of those provinces, you're not going to do well at a national election. And now Jacob Zuma has become the headache of the party. Simple. That's what happened. So could this headache have been avoidable? I think yes. I think maybe the Julius Malema headache is not avoidable because a large part of the ANC vote as well has gone to the EFF. And Jacob Zuma and Julius Malema were very prominent members of the ANC and they had large followings. So that's the most immediate challenge that the ANC is facing around Jacob Zuma. But even if you backtrack a little bit, the instability that occurred in 2021 came as a result of this pursuit of Jacob Zuma by the Ramaphosa administration through the State Capture Commission and all of these instruments. And there wasn't a strategic move to say, okay, we've come into power. Let us leave this guy to go into retirement to preserve the integrity of his name. But that wasn't done. At the point at which Jacob Zuma, as an individual, looks at the situation and says, these guys are coming to get me. These guys want me to die in jail. He will feel as if he has to fight back. His supporters will feel as if he has to fight back. His patronage network, the people who he has taken care of over the years, will feel as if they have to fight back. And some of them will fight back very enthusiastically because they feel as if they will be next. If they don't take any particular action at the point at which you arrest their guy and eliminate their guy, they feel as if I'm next on this particular list. They're coming for me after they get him. And if you look at the history of South Africa, people like de Klerk died honorable deaths. They were celebrated. Their legacies were not attacked for a very long period of time. De Klerk was going to parliament and saying whatever he wanted about South Africa and his thoughts on apartheid and the apartheid regime up until his death. He was saying those things. Why was de Klerk given this get out of jail free card? Because there was an understanding that national cohesion was important, right? That national unity was important. And that even though he had participated and orchestrated and masterminded atrocities in South Africa, and even though there was thirst for blood, that was not going to happen because national cohesion was more important. At the point at which Jacob Zuma stops being president, South Africa is not at a point which we can consider to be an old democracy. Zuma steps down in 2018. 2018 is 6 years ago. South Africa was 24. 24 is not old for a democracy. America has been a democracy since 1776, if I'm not mistaken. And if you think about that, that's a long time to be a democracy. At that point, the democracy has matured so much that you can afford to take certain risks, certain decisions around rule of law. But even America, even under Trump right now, it's struggling. Right? He's testing the integrity of the system and the resilience of the system. But South Africa is a very young democracy. We know that there have been issues in areas such as KwaZulu-Natal. We know that there are undercurrents of ethnic divisions and that there are still some sentiments which are not resolved. They're not as prominent as they used to be in the 90s, but they still exist. And we've seen that people are willing to go out onto the streets to loot shops, and even some of them have sacrificed their lives, not intentionally, because people did pass on during the 2021 protests. We've seen that. So could the ANC have taken a different path? Yes, they could have. They are in power. President Ramaphosa is in power, and he could have taken a different strategic line, not talking about these 9 wasted years, not trying to push aggressively against Jacob Zuma. I think that would have given Jacob Zuma a dignified exit. I think that would have given him a channel to go home, stay in Nkandla, stay focused on the issues of Nkandla and really raising his grandkids and kids and focusing on being a family man. But I don't think that this particular decision to try to make him to be the first president to be sanctioned, punished, vilified in a way that other presidents were not. Other presidents, even if they were not perfect, were allowed to enjoy retirement and their legacies, whether that is Nelson Mandela or Thabo Mbeki. They were allowed to do so. So I do think that a mistake was made. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand me. I'm not saying that all of this is in keeping with principles of law in the manner that we often look at them. I'm saying that this is in keeping with the practice of power. Sometimes when you are the power, there are rules that you are aware of, but you may have to operate outside of in order to achieve a higher ideal and outcome. What is that higher ideal and outcome in this case? National stability. But selfishly, from the perspective of the ANC, the higher ideal for the party would have been to preserve the party and to continue to enjoy electoral success. So even from a purely ANC perspective, I think the ANC hurt itself by going against Jacob Zuma, someone who was prominent within the ANC, popular within the ANC. The man says, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And I can't help but think that this is an instance which shows that to be true. When the kind of factional divisions got sharp within the ANC, it came with a cost to the ANC. I think that social stability is important because preservation of national unity and cohesion and life is more important than strict adherence to every rule that is on paper. And at times, you may even need to change the rule that is on paper to achieve the social cohesion and unity. And this is what was done with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This is why it was done. There were no rules prior which allowed for it to happen in the manner that it did. But laws had to be created to allow, rather than retributive justice, to have this kind of justice which was focused on reconciliation between 2-3 groups of people to make sure that the national project could continue. And many people say that that was one of the things that saved South Africa. And I think looking at all of the dynamics that are playing out now, it may have been worth it to walk away from pursuing Jacob Zuma for South Africa and especially for the ANC. Listen, I don't believe personally that the State Capture Commission was designed to fully examine the issue of state capture, which is why the reports didn't have a definition of state capture in them. It seemed to me that it was designed to seek retributive justice and atonement for Jacob Zuma and anybody who was viewed to be within the Jacob Zuma faction. Part of why I say this is because of what was ignored. People like Brian Molefe came and accused Glencore of corruption. They came and say that Glencore was trying to manipulate prices and exploit Eskom and as a consequence exploit South Africa. And this issue was not extrapolated or explored. People came and accused Naspers of exploiting government and being a monopoly in satellite television and capturing the state. This was not explored. People came and discussed issues around some of the entities that got money from Bosasa, entities who were relatives or close to President Ramaphosa. This was not explored. All that was explored were all of the accusations relating to Jacob Zuma. When you then look at some of the events that unfolded, one of those events is that Glencore paid admission of guilt fines in the UK, and they paid admission of guilt fines in America. What were they admitting guilt for? They admitted guilt for corrupt practices in Africa, manipulating the prices of commodities. They admitted and paid fines for bribing African politicians in 7 countries. They did not admit to anything relating to South Africa, but they admitted to everywhere else. But for me, as a rational thinker, it is implausible to me that you would bribe all of the politicians in Africa except for South Africa. And they had politicians in Glencore who turned out to become very powerful men later. So, knowing what I now know, it seems that prima facie, the allegations against Glencore should have been explored further. Knowing what I know now about Eskom, Eskom is one of them, because I have seen Eskom being parceled up in the name of IPPs and sold to particular individuals who are now generating power through these IPPs. And some of those people said that the price of electricity was too cheap in the 2000s. And they also said that what was blocking independent power producers was the cheapness of that particular electricity. Fast forward, electricity is now very expensive, and those IPPs now exist. Those individuals have now benefited. Do you remember? Do you remember those particular conversations and comments? So knowing what I also now know about South African Airways, billions have been spent in the last 6 years on South African Airways. Billions on Eskom as well. Many of those billions ended up in the pockets of the IPPs. Billions have been spent on SAA. And we know that the sale of SAA did not eventually go through. And in fact, it has been referred to the SIU. And it has been referred to the SIU for investigations of irregularity, because a lot of questions that were asked by the parliamentary committee were not answered. And Parliament said they were uncomfortable with the deal. And then Pravin Gordhan, the Minister of Public Enterprises, said that, okay, the deal is off. But he was opposed to this being taken to the SIU. So looking back at everything I was told about state capture, that, there was real concern about the sale of SAA to the Guptas, etc., etc. All of these narratives around how the Guptas were going to take over everything, coal mines, etc., etc. Then I look now and I'm like, wait a minute. But some of the things the Guptas were being accused of seem to have been done by other people in the good 6 years. So was the State Capture Commission really about state capture, the acquisition of state assets and political power by private brokers? Was that really the purpose of the State Capture Commission investigating that? Or was it more about individuals around Zuma and Jacob Zuma? If it is the latter, then the latter was not worth it because of all of the turmoil that has ensued from that particular point. In a nutshell, I'm saying that it was a bad and expensive decision, which has not even led to any outcomes. No prosecutions have been successful for big people implicated in state capture even up to now. And 2 major cases have failed in the test of the courts where legal scrutiny is applied. If you recall, one of the cases, the judge even said that it was a disaster, the quality of evidence and investigation that was being presented. So, in a nutshell, I'm saying I think that the pursuit of Jacob Zuma by the ANC post his departure from power was a mistake for the ANC and was not useful in getting any accountability for state capture and or corruption because 1, it didn't investigate much of state capture, and 2, even where it did investigate that state capture, did not come up with results. And finally, that it adversely affected social cohesion to the point where people's lives were lost and businesses lost billions worth of infrastructure and goods. What do you think, though? Do you think that it was worth it, the pursuit of Jacob Zuma? Or do you think that they should have left him to go and retire and enjoy his retirement? Let's have a conversation.